July 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands. The Japanese Imperial Navy cook stared at the American officer in disbelief, certain he had misunderstood the broken Japanese phrases. The Marine officer, Lieutenant James Forrester, repeated his request with careful pronunciation. "We need help feeding our wounded. You are cooks. Will you prepare meals for American Marines?" In that moment, Seaman First Class Hiroshi Tanaka experienced cognitive dissonance so profound it momentarily suspended his reality. After 3 weeks hiding in caves following the fall of Saipan, surviving on raw jungle tubers while evading American patrols, Tanaka had finally surrendered only when starvation made death inevitable. Japanese military doctrine had prepared him for immediate execution. Imperial propaganda described Americans as sadistic devils who tortured prisoners. Instead, this officer was asking him to cook. Across the Pacific Theater in summer 1944, 11,675 Japanese military personnel had been captured alive, a minuscule number considering Japan's millions under arms. This reflected the Japanese military code that deemed surrender more shameful than death. On Saipan alone, of approximately 30,000 Japanese defenders, fewer than 1,000 surrendered. The remainder fought to death or committed suicide, including thousands of civilians who leapt from the island's northern cliffs rather than face American capture. The Americans' unprecedented request to Tanaka and 7 other captured Japanese Navy cooks emerged from practical necessity. The battle for Saipan had produced 16,525 American casualties, with 3,426 killed and 13,099 wounded. Field hospitals operated beyond capacity, with medical personnel working 20-hour shifts. The 7th Field Hospital alone treated 2,417 casualties in July 1944, creating a logistical crisis that extended to food service. "We expected to be executed immediately," Tanaka later testified in a 1952 interview preserved in the Naval History and Heritage Command archives. "When surrender became inevitable, we prepared for death according to our training. The American request to cook meals confused us completely. It contradicted everything we had been taught about American barbarism." The Japanese military code, Bushido, considered surrender the ultimate disgrace. Training manuals recovered from Saipan revealed that Japanese soldiers received explicit instructions: never live to experience the shame of being a prisoner. Official Imperial Japanese Army Directive 2193 stated, "It may be necessary to sacrifice one's life for the emperor or nation, but it is inexcusable to fall into enemy hands alive." Against this backdrop, the American request represented psychological warfare more effective than any interrogation technique. It challenged the entire foundation of Japanese military indoctrination about American savagery. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Hayes, the senior medical officer who originated the idea, documented his reasoning in the official after-action report. Faced with severe shortage of mess personnel and observing the professional background of several POWs, I proposed employing their skills to address our critical need while potentially building cooperative relationships with prisoners who might otherwise remain hostile. The understaffed medical facilities contained 2,453 wounded Marines requiring special diets and regular meals. Available mess personnel numbered 37, creating an impossible ratio of 1 cook for every 66 patients. Temperature and humidity averaging 88 degrees with 79% humidity in July 1944, accelerated food spoilage, and increased the importance of proper meal preparation to prevent illness among already compromised patients. Naval records show that standard field rations proved inadequate for wounded recovery. Medical reports documented decreased appetite and subsequent slower healing among patients limited to standard K and C rations. Lieutenant Commander Robert Wilson, Chief Surgeon, noted in his July 18th report, "Improved nutrition correlates directly with decreased infection rates and accelerated healing. Current ration systems fail to meet recovery requirements." The 8 Japanese Navy cooks possess specialized training from the Imperial Navy's culinary school in Yokosuka. Their expertise exceeded typical military cooks, as the Japanese Navy maintained higher culinary standards than most military services. Tanaka had trained for 3 years before receiving his assignment to the destroyer Shikinami, learning techniques for maximizing flavor from limited ingredients, a skill particularly valuable in field hospital conditions. The moment of decision came when Chief Pharmacist's mate William Donovan escorted the Japanese cooks to the field hospital's makeshift kitchen, a collection of field stoves under canvas tarps behind the surgical tents. The sounds of wounded Marines moaning, the metallic smell of blood mixing with antiseptic, and the visible exhaustion of medical personnel created a sensory environment that challenged the Japanese cooks' indoctrination. "I expected to see American monsters torturing our people," Tanaka recalled. "Instead, I saw overworked doctors trying desperately to save lives. Japanese lives among them. 3 wounded Japanese soldiers were receiving identical care to Americans. This contradicted everything we had been told." After 12 minutes of intense discussion among themselves in Japanese, the cooks made their decision. Senior Cook Petty Officer Masato Sato, formerly of the Japanese carrier Hyo, stepped forward and bowed slightly to Lieutenant Forrester. "We will cook," he said simply. "Where are your supplies?" With this acknowledgement, an unprecedented experiment in wartime humanitarian cooperation began, one that would challenge fundamental assumptions on both sides about the nature of their enemy and the possibility of human connection amid the Pacific War's savage brutality. The first attempt at communication between the Japanese cooks and American kitchen staff resembled an elaborate pantomime. Neither group possessed more than 5 words of the other's language. Petty Officer Sato pointed to ingredients while Sergeant Michael DeVito, the head mess officer, nodded or shook his head. Basic kitchen vocabulary, knife, pot, water, fire, became the foundation of a primitive shared lexicon that would eventually expand to include hundreds of culinary terms. Field Hospital No. 7 operated in what had been a Japanese administrative building near Garapan. The kitchen facilities consisted of 4 field stoves, 2 makeshift prep tables constructed from ammunition crates, a collection of scavenged Japanese and American cookware, and a water purification system that produced 175 gallons daily. Storage conditions proved challenging in Saipan's tropical climate, where temperatures reached 91 degrees with humidity exceeding 80%. Without refrigeration, most protein came from canned sources, spam, corned beef, and tuna, supplemented by occasional fresh fish caught offshore by recovering Marines well enough to assist. Japanese military cooks underwent training significantly different from their American counterparts. Imperial Navy records captured on Saipan revealed that naval culinary training emphasized maximizing nutritional value from minimal ingredients, preventing spoilage in tropical conditions, and maintaining morale through food presentation even when ingredients were limited. The average Japanese Navy cook received 640 hours of formal instruction compared to 120 hours for American counterparts. The contrast between Japanese and American military rations revealed fundamentally different approaches to wartime nutrition. American K rations contained 3,000 calories daily, including chocolate, instant coffee, and canned meat. Japanese field rations averaged 1,700 calories, primarily rice with dried fish, pickled vegetables, and barley tea. Where American rations emphasized calories and comfort foods, Japanese rations focused on compactness and preservation. "Food represents the spirit of a warrior," read the Imperial Japanese Navy Culinary Training Manual recovered from Saipan. "The cook's duty extends beyond mere sustenance. He provides spiritual strength through his creations." This philosophy placed immense pressure on the Japanese cooks, who viewed their craft as a form of spiritual service rather than mere sustenance. The first meal prepared under this unusual arrangement occurred on July 17, 1944. Working with available ingredients, the Japanese cooks created a modified rice porridge, okayu, using American long-grain rice, supplemented with small amounts of canned tuna, rehydrated vegetables, and broth made from available bouillon cubes. They prepared 178 portions, served in rotation to the most severely wounded patients. "I expected resistance or even refusal from our wounded," wrote Lieutenant Hayes in his daily report. Instead, the novel flavors and careful presentation appeared to stimulate appetite among patients who had previously refused standard mess offerings. Consumption rates increased approximately 37% compared to previous meals. Marine Private First Class Robert Johnson from Iowa, recovering from shrapnel wounds to his abdomen, documented the experience in a letter home preserved in the Marine Corps Historical Division archives. "The chow here took a strange turn yesterday. Got some sort of rice dish, simple but tasty. Found out later it was made by Jap POWs. Hard to square that with what we've seen in fighting, but my belly doesn't much care who does the cooking as long as it stays down." Supply records from July 1944 reveal unusual requisition patterns as the arrangement continued. Standard items like wheat flour, canned beans, and powdered eggs were supplemented with requisitions for soy sauce, 4 gallons, rice vinegar, 2 gallons, dried seaweed, 5 pounds, and bonito flakes, 3 pounds, ingredients entirely absent from standard military supply chains. These items arrived via airdrops from Honolulu, where Japanese-American merchants provided cultural guidance on appropriate substitutions for unavailable authentic ingredients. Colonel Thomas Foster, commanding officer of medical operations on Saipan, initially expressed skepticism about the arrangement. "Employing enemy personnel in food preparation presents obvious security concerns," he noted in a July 20th memorandum. However, the demonstrable improvement in patient nutrition and subsequent recovery rates justifies continued supervised implementation. His authorization required armed guards present in kitchen areas and food tasters before serving. Measures gradually relaxed as trust developed. For the Japanese cooks, the arrangement created profound internal conflict. "Each meal required us to confront our training," Tanaka later recalled. "We had been taught that service to enemy wounded was dishonorable. Yet the act of cooking, of creating something beneficial, satisfied a deeper human need. We began to measure success not in military victory, but in empty plates returned from men who needed strength to heal." By the end of July, the Japanese cooks had established a modified schedule producing 2 meals daily for approximately 200 of the most severely wounded patients. They worked alongside American mess personnel who gradually adopted elements of Japanese preparation techniques, particularly methods for extending limited ingredients and enhancing flavor through careful preparation rather than abundant supplies. Marine Corps Captain Richard Stevenson, a medical officer who observed the program's development, wrote in his August 3rd assessment, "The unexpected cooperation between former enemies in the kitchen has produced benefits beyond improved nutrition. It has created a psychological shift among both patients and prisoners. The act of providing nourishment appears to transcend the hatreds fostered by combat. I observe Japanese prisoners now walking with improved posture, suggesting renewed purpose, while our wounded exhibit less hostility toward their former enemies." As the unusual culinary experiment entered its 3rd week, rumors of Japanese hospital food spread among Marine units still engaged in clearing isolated pockets of resistance on Saipan. The psychological impact extended beyond mere nutrition. It created cognitive dissonance that challenged fundamental assumptions about the enemy on both sides. This unplanned experiment in culinary diplomacy was beginning to transform how each group perceived the other, one carefully prepared meal at a time. August 1944. Saipan's fierce summer heat had begun to moderate slightly as the Japanese cooks entered their 4th week of service. What had begun as a desperate improvisation was evolving into a structured program. The cooks now operated with increasing autonomy, planning menus 3 days in advance and submitting ingredient requests to American quartermasters who had learned to accommodate their unusual needs. The evolution of trust happened gradually, marked by small but significant changes. The armed guards initially stationed at both kitchen entrances were reduced to a single Marine who often sat reading magazines rather than watching the cooks. Knives, initially counted and locked away after each meal preparation, now remained in the kitchen under the Japanese cook's supervision. These subtle shifts reflected a growing recognition that these men identified more as cooks than as enemy combatants. Navy records documented the transformation in a series of weekly reports. POW cooking detail continues to exceed expectations, wrote Lieutenant Hayes in his August 14th assessment. Meal consumption among patients has increased 42% compared to pre-implementation baselines. Average patient weight loss during recovery has decreased from 7.4 pounds to 3.2 pounds for comparable injuries. Recommendation, program continuation, and possible expansion. The Japanese cooks demonstrated remarkable adaptability with limited ingredients. When rice supplies dwindled in early August due to transport delays, they created alternative dishes using American wheat flour to make udon-style noodles served in broth with small amounts of protein. When tropical storms prevented fishing expeditions, they developed techniques to make canned tuna palatable by marinating it in improvised sauces made from available condiments. What impresses me most, wrote Marine Mess Sergeant DeVito in his daily log, is how they transform the same ingredients we've always had into completely different meals. They use every scrap, create stocks from bones and vegetable trimmings, and somehow make institutional cooking feel intentional rather than merely functional. As word of the program's success spread, similar arrangements emerged at other medical facilities across newly secured Pacific Islands. By September 1944, 15 separate field hospitals reported employing captured Japanese cooks, bakers, or mess personnel. On Tinian, adjacent to Saipan, 6 Japanese Navy bakers captured during the island's fall began producing bread and simple pastries for a field hospital serving 1,200 patients. On Guam, 4 Japanese Army cooks assisted in feeding both American wounded and civilian internees. Medical records revealed unexpected benefits beyond improved nutrition. Field Hospital No. 7 reported 17% faster average recovery times for comparable wounds among patients receiving Japanese-prepared meals versus standard mess offerings. Infection rates decreased by 11%, which medical officers attributed to improved nutritional status supporting immune function. Weight maintenance improved dramatically, with the average patient maintaining 94% of pre-injury weight compared to 82% under previous dietary regimens. The most profound changes, however, were psychological. As the Japanese cooks gained confidence in their protected status, they began interacting more with the patients they fed. Simple phrases in English, eat slowly, more tomorrow, good for strength, entered their vocabulary. Patients learned to say oishi, delicious, and arigato, thank you, in return. Marine Private James Williams from Georgia, recovering from leg wounds, described the strange evolution in a letter home dated August 19, 1944. The Jap cook who brings my meals has started remembering how I like things. Less soup, more solid food. Yesterday he brought extra fish because he noticed I finished that first. Hard to square with the same bunch who fought to the death a mile from here. Don't know what to make of it, except people are complicated, I guess. For the Japanese cooks, the experience proved equally transformative. We began to see the wounded not as enemies, but as hungry men needing strength, Tanaka recalled in post-war documentation. Their appreciation for our cooking restored a sense of honor we believed lost in surrender. We could still serve with dignity, still perform our duties with excellence. Security concerns never entirely disappeared. Naval intelligence officers interviewed each cook weekly, searching for signs of sabotage or espionage. They found instead increasing cooperation and voluntary information sharing. Several cooks began providing cultural context for Japanese military practices, explaining aspects of training and discipline that helped Americans understand their adversaries. This information proved valuable but came without coercion, a product of developing relationships rather than interrogation. By late August, The first genuine friendships had begun to form between the Japanese cooks and American medical personnel who worked alongside them daily. These connections remained cautious, limited by language barriers and the overarching reality of the war. Yet they represented profound shifts in perception on both sides. The most dramatic evidence of this transformation came on August 27th, when an American bombing raid struck uncomfortably close to Field Hospital No. 7. As patients were moved to shelter, Japanese cook seaman Yukio Hasegawa instinctively helped carry a stretcher bearing a severely wounded Marine. The moment, captured in a medical officer's report, represented a complete inversion of expectations, an enemy soldier risking his safety to protect an American. "I witnessed today what would have been unimaginable 2 months ago," wrote Navy Chaplain Robert Miller, who observed the incident. "A Japanese sailor willingly placed himself in danger to protect an American Marine. This occurs outside any framework of military expectation or obligation. It suggests that shared humanity can emerge even between sworn enemies when given suitable conditions." As August ended, the experiment in culinary diplomacy had evolved from desperate improvisation to established practice. What began as a pragmatic response to personnel shortages had become something more significant, a demonstration that beneath the savage enmity of Pacific warfare, recognition of shared humanity remained possible. The Japanese cooks, preparing their careful meals from limited ingredients, had created something beyond mere sustenance. They had established a fragile bridge between enemies, constructed one meal at a time. September 1944. The aroma of dashi stock simmering on the field stoves became a familiar scent at Field Hospital No. 7. The simple combination of dried bonito flakes and seaweed, imported from Hawaii, created a distinctive umami fragrance that patients came to associate with mealtimes. This basic broth, adapted by Japanese cooks to work with available ingredients, formed the foundation of many dishes that proved particularly effective for wounded Marines struggling with appetite. One dish emerged as unexpectedly significant, a modified version of kayu, rice porridge simmered until soft and easily digestible. The Japanese cooks enhanced this simple preparation with small amounts of protein, vegetables, and carefully balanced seasonings. Medical officers noted its particular effectiveness for patients recovering from abdominal wounds or surgeries when solid foods remained challenging. Nutritional analysis conducted by Navy medical staff determined that the modified kayu delivered 27% more available calories than standard liquid diets previously used for such cases. The consistency allows for maximum nutrient absorption while minimizing digestive stress, wrote Lieutenant Commander Wilson in his September medical assessment. Patient acceptance exceeds 94% compared to 61% for previous formulations. We are documenting the preparation method for potential implementation across Pacific Theater medical facilities. Marine Private Henry Morrison from Pennsylvania, recovering from a severe abdominal wound that had required 3 surgeries, credited the specialized diet with his survival. "Couldn't keep anything down for weeks," he wrote in a letter home preserved in Marine Corps archives. "Doc said I was wasting away. Then they brought this rice soup made by the Japanese fellows. Something about it stayed down when nothing else would. Strange to think some Jap cook might be the reason I'm coming home." Medical records supported this anecdotal evidence. Patients receiving specialized diets prepared by Japanese cooks showed hemoglobin improvements averaging 0.8 gdl, greater than control groups over comparable recovery periods. Wound healing rates improved by approximately 14%, and average hospital stays shortened by 3.7 days for similar injury profiles. The financial implications were significant. Each hospital day cost approximately $27 in 1944 dollars, $420 in 2025 value, creating substantial savings across thousands of patients. For the Japanese cooks, the work provided unexpected dignity amid captivity. "In imperial service, we cooked to maintain fighting strength," Seaman Tanaka explained in post-war interviews. "At the American hospital, we cooked to restore health. This difference transformed our understanding of food's purpose and our role in preparing it. The cultural exchange flowed in both directions. American mess personnel adopted Japanese techniques for extracting maximum flavor from minimal ingredients. Japanese cooks learned American expectations for portion size and presentation. Both groups discovered common ground in their commitment to nourishing the wounded. Psychological assessments conducted by Navy medical officers documented transformation among both patients and Japanese personnel. Initial hostility from patients has evolved into appreciation and curiosity, noted Lieutenant Ralph Parker, medical psychiatrist. POWs display increased cooperation, improved affect, and voluntary engagement beyond required duties. The shared purpose of healing appears to transcend previous combat enmity. The arrangement directly contradicted wartime propaganda on both sides. Japanese military training had portrayed Americans as wasteful, undisciplined, and cruel to prisoners. American media depicted Japanese as fanatical, inhumane, and incapable of compassion. The daily reality of Japanese cooks carefully preparing healing meals for wounded American Marines created cognitive dissonance that challenged these narratives. Lieutenant James Barrett, intelligence officer assigned to monitor the program, documented this transformation in his weekly reports. POW Cook. Petty Officer Sato has begun collecting specific information on patient preferences and tailoring preparations accordingly. This level of personalized attention exceeds standard requirements and suggests genuine professional pride rather than mere compliance. One particularly moving exchange occurred when Marine Sergeant David Miller, recovering from severe leg wounds, requested to meet the cook who had prepared his meals. Through an interpreter, he expressed gratitude to Seaman Hiroshi Tanaka. The Japanese cook responded by showing Miller a small photograph of his family in Yokohama. This simple human connection, acknowledging families and lives beyond the battlefield, represented a profound break from the dehumanization that typically characterized Pacific War attitudes. The cultural power of food as communication became increasingly apparent. When language barriers prevented direct expression, the offering and receiving of nourishment created its own dialogue. "I cannot speak to tell them the soup needs rest to heal internal wounds," Petty Officer Sato explained through an interpreter. "But when I see empty bowls returned, I know they have received my message." Military intelligence recognized additional benefits beyond improved patient care. Japanese POWs engaged in meaningful work proved significantly more willing to provide useful information during casual conversations than those subjected to formal interrogation. Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Robert Hayes documented this phenomenon. POWs in cooking program voluntarily provided details about Japanese naval training, shipboard procedures, and technical specifications during informal kitchen conversations that resisted extraction under direct questioning. Medical reports from September 1944 reveal the program's expansion to incorporate specific therapeutic diets. Japanese cooks developed specialized preparations for patients with particular medical needs. High-protein regimens for those with extensive tissue damage, easily digestible preparations for those with compromised digestive function, and calorie-dense formulations for severely undernourished patients. The contrast with standard prisoner treatment elsewhere in the Pacific remained stark. While Japanese POWs working in field hospitals experienced increasing integration and respect, those in standard detention facilities faced isolation and suspicion. The difference in cooperation levels proved dramatic. Cooks in medical facilities showed 96% compliance with directives compared to 41% among comparable prisoners in standard detention. By late September, the barriers between kitchen and ward had diminished significantly. Japanese cooks began accompanying mess carts during distribution, directly observing how patients responded to their preparations and collecting immediate feedback. This direct connection reinforced their sense of purpose and accelerated menu refinements based on patient response. "We have witnessed the emergence of an unexpected therapeutic community," wrote Captain Thomas Reeves, medical administrator for the Mariana Islands operations. The act of feeding wounded enemies has created relationships that transcend conventional military boundaries. These Japanese cooks have demonstrated that compassion can emerge in unlikely contexts when human beings engage in fundamental acts of care for one another. What had begun as a desperate expedient had evolved into a model for humanitarian cooperation amid wartime brutality. The Japanese cooks, preparing meals from limited ingredients for men who had recently been mortal enemies, demonstrated how the universal language of food could build bridges across the Pacific War's seemingly unbridgeable divisions. October 1944. News of the successful cooking program spread across Pacific theater operations through informal channels, medical officer transfers, and official reports. What began as improvisation on Saipan evolved into deliberate policy as American forces secured additional islands with their inevitable casualties and captured personnel. By mid-October, 27 field hospitals across the Mariana and Marshall Islands employed 142 Japanese Navy and Army cooks to prepare meals for wounded Americans and Allied personnel. On newly secured Peleliu, 6 Japanese cooks captured during the brutal fighting worked alongside American mess staff at the 1st Marine Division Field Hospital. At Ulithi Atoll, the massive fleet anchorage supporting the Philippines campaign, 4 hospital ships employed Japanese culinary personnel to prepare specialized diets for the most severely wounded. On Guam, the largest naval hospital in the forward area incorporated 23 Japanese cooks into its feeding operations for over 6,000 patients. Naval records document this expansion through requisition patterns and personnel assignments. Specialist ingredients previously unknown in military supply chains, bonito flakes, rice vinegar, varied seaweeds, sesame oil, became standard items shipped to forward medical facilities. Procurement officers created new supply categories to accommodate these requirements. Interpreter services, initially ad hoc arrangements, became formalized with Japanese-American Nisei soldiers, often assigned to facilitate communication between cooks and medical staff. The statistical impact proved impossible to ignore. Navy Medical Corps analysis from October 1944 documented that facilities employing Japanese cooks reported average recovery time reductions of 4.3 days for comparable injuries. With approximately 18,000 wounded personnel receiving such meals daily at a cost of $27 per hospital day, $429 in 2025 value, the program generated estimated savings exceeding $2.1 million monthly, $33.5 million in 2025 value, while returning combatants to duty more quickly. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of Pacific Forces, acknowledged the program's success in a classified directive dated October 11, 1944. The employment of qualified enemy culinary personnel in appropriate medical settings has demonstrated substantial benefits to patient care with minimal security concerns. Commanding officers are authorized to implement similar programs where conditions permit, subject to proper security protocols. This official sanction elevated what had been a pragmatic field innovation into formal military policy, a remarkable development considering the Pacific War's characteristic brutality. The contrast with German POW labor programs in the European theatre was stark. While German prisoners were routinely employed in various support roles, Japanese prisoners rarely received such opportunities due to lingering suspicion and cultural barriers. The cooking program represented a rare exception where practical necessity overcame entrenched prejudice. As the program expanded, so did the culinary offerings. Japanese cooks, gaining confidence and access to more varied ingredients, developed an increasingly sophisticated menu rotation. Military dietitians documented these innovations for potential post-war implementation. A particularly successful creation, a modified miso soup enriched with additional protein and vegetables, became standardized across medical facilities as particularly effective for patients transitioning from liquid to solid foods. Analysis showed it delivered 24% more utilizable protein than comparable American preparations. The success generated inevitable opposition from those who considered any humane treatment of Japanese prisoners inappropriate. Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper, published a critical letter from a Marine sergeant in November 1944. "While our boys died in Jap prison camps, we're teaching their cooks how to make chocolate pudding. Something's wrong with this picture." Such sentiments reflected the war's bitter reality. Japanese treatment of Allied prisoners remained notoriously brutal, making American humane treatment seem incongruous to many. Admiral William Halsey, known for his particularly hard line against Japanese forces, initially opposed the program. "The only good Jap is a dead Jap," he had famously declared. Yet when presented with medical outcome data during a November 1944 command conference, Halsey reluctantly acknowledged the pragmatic benefits. "If it gets our boys back to the fight faster, I can hold my nose and accept it," he conceded, according to meeting minutes preserved in naval archives. Individual success stories emerged from the program. On Guam, Japanese warrant officer Takashi Yamamoto, formerly a culinary instructor at the Yokosuka Naval Base, developed a comprehensive training program for hospital nutrition that combined Japanese techniques with American ingredients. His system, documented by naval medical officers, would later influence post-war military nutritional approaches. On Saipan, Petty Officer Sato created a modified diet specifically for burn victims that improved protein utilization and wound healing, earning formal recognition in medical reports. Intelligence value became increasingly apparent as the program matured. In a declassified 1946 assessment, naval intelligence credited the cooking program with obtaining valuable information about Japanese military operations, technical specifications, and psychological factors that formal interrogation had failed to extract. The report noted, POWs engaged in meaningful work where they maintained professional dignity consistently provided more accurate and comprehensive information through casual conversation than those subjected to direct questioning. Perhaps most remarkably, the program began influencing Japanese POW policy beyond medical settings. By December 1944, limited cooking programs had been implemented at 3 standard POW facilities, where Japanese cooks prepared meals for their fellow prisoners rather than American personnel. This improved nutrition, reduced waste, and significantly decreased disciplinary incidents. Camp commanders reported 67% fewer security violations after implementing these programs, as prisoners gained sense of purpose and community through familiar food traditions. As Allied forces prepared for the anticipated invasion of Japan itself, medical planners incorporated Japanese culinary expertise into operational planning. Draft documents from November 1944 included provisions for expanding the cooking program to support potentially massive casualty numbers. Indigenous culinary personnel represent a valuable resource for managing anticipated medical feeding requirements, stated one planning document. Their skills with local ingredients and efficient preparation methods should be systematically incorporated into medical support operations. The transformation in attitudes extended to individual participants on both sides. Japanese cooks, initially suspicious and fearful, increasingly viewed their American counterparts as colleagues rather than captors. American medical personnel came to respect the skill and dedication of these former enemies. One Navy doctor wrote in his personal journal, "I have watched men who were trying to kill each other 3 months ago now working together to save lives through something as fundamental as food. If this is possible, perhaps there is hope for what comes after this terrible war ends." By year's end, what began as 8 confused Japanese cooks in a makeshift Saipan kitchen had evolved into a systematic program employing hundreds of prisoners across the Pacific Theater. Their work not only improved medical outcomes, but demonstrated that even amid history's most brutal conflict, human connection remained possible through the universal language of nourishment and care. October 1945. 2 months after Japan's surrender, the USS Admiral W.L.A. Capps departed Manila Harbor, carrying 1,147 Japanese prisoners returning home, including 37 cooks who had worked in American field hospitals across the Pacific. Among them stood Seaman First Class Hiroshi Tanaka, gazing toward the horizon where Japan awaited. Unlike most returning prisoners who carried only shame, Tanaka and his fellow cooks brought something unexpected. Letters of commendation from American medical officers, recipes adapted to span cultural divides, and experiences that contradicted everything they had been taught about their enemies. The repatriation of Japanese prisoners proceeded slowly through 1946, with priority given to those who had cooperated with American forces. Naval records show that culinary personnel were consistently classified as Category A for early return, reflecting both their cooperation and the recognition that their skills would prove valuable in rebuilding a devastated Japan where food shortages affected millions. By July 1946, all 142 Japanese cooks who had served in American medical facilities had returned to their homeland. Their reception in Japan proved complex. The prevailing culture still viewed surrender as shameful, yet their unusual service created a different narrative. "We did not surrender to avoid death," Petty Officer Sato explained to his questioning family. "We continued to serve with honor in different circumstances. We maintained the warrior virtue of duty, even in captivity." The first documented reunion between a Japanese cook and American patients occurred in April 1952. When former Navy cook Masato Sato met with 3 Marines he had fed at Field Hospital No. 7 during a Japanese-American friendship event in Tokyo. Photography preserved in the National Archives shows Sato and former Marine Sergeant Michael Donovan embracing, their shared humanity transcending the enmity that had once divided them. "Your rice soup kept me alive when nothing else would stay down," Donovan told Sato through an interpreter. "I've never forgotten that kindness came from unexpected hands." This reunion marked the beginning of dozens of similar connections as occupation forces transitioned to alliance. By 1955, 16 formal reunions between Japanese culinary personnel and former patients had been documented by occupation authorities. These emotional meetings often featured the preparation and sharing of the same dishes that had sustained the wounded during wartime, now enjoyed in peacetime as symbols of reconciliation. The program's influence extended beyond individual relationships to shape broader occupation policies regarding food and cultural respect. General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters, recognizing the successful precedent, incorporated Japanese culinary practices into occupation feeding programs addressing civilian malnutrition. Occupation nutritional guidance distributed in December 1945 specifically referenced techniques developed by Japanese cooks in military hospitals for maximizing nutritional value from limited ingredients. Military medical approaches evolved directly from this wartime innovation. A 1948 Navy Medical Corps analysis titled Nutritional Support for Combat Casualties devoted 17 pages to lessons learned from Japanese culinary techniques. The report concluded, "The incorporation of enemy culinary expertise represented an unexpected advancement in combat casualty care. Future medical planning should systematically identify and utilize indigenous food knowledge rather than imposing standardized diets inappropriate to local conditions or patient backgrounds." This principle found application in subsequent conflicts. During the Korean War, 1950-1953, American field hospitals employed Korean cooks to prepare culturally appropriate meals for both United Nations personnel and civilians requiring medical care. In Vietnam, the 71st Evacuation Hospital incorporated Vietnamese culinary staff beginning in 1965, explicitly citing the World War II Japanese precedent in its operational planning. The statistical summary of the original program's impact remains impressive. Naval Medical Corps final assessment documented 142 Japanese cooks preparing approximately 1.8 million specialized meals across 27 Pacific medical facilities between July 1944 and August 1945. Patient recovery statistics showed 17% faster return to duty rates for comparable injuries among those receiving Japanese-prepared specialized diets versus standard mess offerings. The program saved an estimated $31.7 million in 1944 $45, $505 million in 2025 value, through shortened hospital stays and reduced medical complications. Academic analysis of this unusual historical footnote began with Dr. Eleanor Jackson's 1957 paper in the Journal of Military Medicine, Culinary Diplomacy, Japanese Cooks in American Field Hospitals. Her conclusion that food transcended enmity when official diplomacy could not establish the theoretical framework for subsequent studies of food as a diplomatic tool. By 1975, the program had become a standard case study in military medical textbooks, cited for both its practical benefits and its demonstration of humanitarian principles amid brutal conflict. The individual life trajectories of program participants revealed its lasting impact. Hiroshi Tanaka returned to Yokohama and opened a small restaurant in 1951 that incorporated American influences alongside traditional Japanese cuisine. His establishment became popular with occupation personnel and later with Japanese customers seeking international flavors. In a 1967 interview with Stars and Stripes, Tanaka explained, "My time feeding wounded Marines taught me that food builds bridges between enemies. My restaurant continues this lesson in peacetime." On the American side, several medical officers who had overseen the program pursued careers emphasizing cross-cultural understanding. Dr. Thomas Hayes, who had initiated the original Saipan arrangement, joined the World Health Organization in 1952, focusing on international nutrition programs. In his 1973 memoir, he identified the Japanese Cooks program as his professional turning point. "Watching former enemies work together to heal the wounded convinced me that human connection remains possible even across the most bitter divides." The program directly challenged propaganda narratives that had defined each side's perception of the other. Japanese imperial doctrine had portrayed Americans as devils incapable of humane treatment. American wartime media depicted Japanese as fanatical and inhuman. Yet in field hospital kitchens across the Pacific, individual Japanese and Americans discovered their shared humanity through the fundamental act of preparing and providing nourishment. In perhaps the most profound legacy, the children of several Japanese cooks later pursued careers specifically focused on international reconciliation. Takashi Yamamoto's daughter became a prominent nutritionist who helped establish student exchange programs between Japanese and American culinary schools in the 1970s. Masato Sato's son served as a Japanese diplomat in Washington during the 1980s, later writing that his father's hospital experience had inspired his diplomatic career. "My father taught me that peace begins with seeing the humanity in former enemies." The final assessment belongs perhaps to Seaman Tanaka, who in his last interview before his death in 1992 reflected, "When that American officer asked us to cook for wounded Marines, he offered more than work. He offered redemption through service. We had been taught that Americans would torture us if captured. Instead, they gave us knives, food, and trust. In that kitchen on Saipan, surrounded by the war's destruction, we discovered that humanity can survive even the worst conflicts. Sometimes it survives through something as simple as a well-prepared meal offered to someone who was your enemy only yesterday."